The late afternoon sun was dipping low when Ethan rode along the dusty road, the kind that seemed to stretch forever across the quiet land. He had spent the morning in town selling a few cattle, speaking only when necessary, keeping to himself like he always did. People knew him as the quiet cowboy who preferred the sound of the wind over the sound of voices. He lived far from anyone, on a lonely ranch where the days were long and the nights were even longer. He had grown used to silence, even when it hurt. But he never complained. He simply rode, worked, slept, and repeated the same cycle every day. On this day, as he headed home, he had no idea his life was about to change. His horse slowed without him telling it to, ears flicking toward an old railway stop that hadn't been used in years. The wood planks were cracked, the paint was peeling, and no traveler ever waited there anymore. It was the kind of place the wind visited more often than people. Ethan was about to ride past when he noticed something. Movement. At first he thought maybe it was a stray dog or a tumbleweed caught in the breeze. But as he looked closer, he saw a girl, very young, sitting on the platform with her knees pulled close to her chest. She looked like she had been waiting there for hours, maybe longer. Her clothes were worn, dusty, and far too thin for the cold wind that touched the land at sunset. Her hair was messy, not out of style, but out of hardship. What struck Ethan hardest, however, was the tiny bundle in her arms. A baby, wrapped in a blanket so thin that every cold gust made the child's small body tremble. Ethan stopped his horse fully now, feeling something shift inside him. He wasn't the kind of man to involve himself in anyone's life, yet he couldn't force himself to keep riding. Something about the girl's posture, her stillness, her quiet fear, made him pause. He wasn't sure if she even saw him at first. She kept her gaze downward, as if she had learned that looking up only brought more pain. He cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle her. "You all right, miss?" he asked in a gentle tone he hadn't used in years. The girl raised her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. They were tired, frightened, and filled with something Ethan recognized: hopelessness. She stood up shakily, holding the baby closer. She took a hesitant step forward, and then another, as if unsure if he was safe to approach. When she finally stood close enough for him to see her clearly, Ethan realized she couldn't have been more than 15 or 16. The baby, on the other hand, looked no more than a few months old. Her lips trembled before she spoke. Her voice was soft, but carried a deep desperation that cut straight through him. "Mister, can you buy us?" The question hit Ethan like a sharp blow. Everything inside him froze. He stared at her, unable to understand for a moment. She wasn't asking for coins. She wasn't asking for food. Her words were shaped by fear and confusion, by the belief that her only worth in the world was something someone could purchase. "By you?" he repeated quietly, almost whispering, because the words felt too heavy. The girl nodded quickly, afraid he misunderstood. "Please," she said, clutching the baby tighter. "We won't cause trouble. I can work. I'll do anything. Just don't leave us here." Ethan slid off his horse slowly, not wanting to make any sudden movements. As he stepped closer, he saw how thin she was, how her hands trembled from exhaustion. The baby let out a weak cry, the kind that came from hunger more than fear. When Ethan heard that sound, something inside him cracked. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Lena," she answered. "And this is Rose." Ethan nodded, letting the names settle in his mind. "Lena, I'm not buying anyone. You hear me? I'm not here to hurt you." She looked confused, as if she had expected disappointment or rejection, not gentleness. Ethan took a careful step closer, lowering his voice further. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. Lena swallowed hard. "Since early morning. They brought us here. My uncle and his wife. They said they couldn't keep feeding us anymore. They said I was too much trouble. They told me to wait here because someone would come by. Her eyes lowered again. But nobody came. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. He imagined a child abandoned by people who should have protected her. He imagined her sitting alone all day, hoping for help that never arrived. His heart ached in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Did they hurt you?" he asked carefully. She shook her head. "No. They just said they didn't want us anymore. They said I had nothing left to give, so maybe someone else would take me." Lena looked up again. "That's why I asked if you could buy us. I didn't know what else to say." Her words were not bold. They were broken, and they came from a place of fear, not misunderstanding. She had been taught that her life had no value unless someone wanted her. That hurt Ethan more than anything else he had heard. He exhaled slowly, calming the storm that brewed inside him. "Nobody should ever say that to you," he said firmly. He looked at Rose again. The baby had stopped crying, but only because she was too tired. Her little face was pale, and her blanket barely covered her properly. Ethan wondered how long she had gone without proper food. "Lena," he said gently, "you and the baby need a warm place. Food, rest. You won't find that here." She hesitated, eyes widening with fear. "Are you leaving?" she whispered. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I'm taking you with me." Lena blinked in surprise, tears filling her eyes instantly. "You are?" "Yes," Ethan said, with more certainty than he expected from himself. "But not because I'm buying anything. I'm helping you because you need help. That's all." Lena looked down, hiding her face as a tear slid down her cheek. She nodded slowly, clinging to the baby like she was afraid the world might still take her away. Ethan guided her gently to his horse. He spoke softly so she wouldn't feel rushed or scared. He helped her mount, making sure she and Rose were secure before he climbed up behind them. The horse shifted its weight, but Lena quickly leaned forward, holding the baby steady. Ethan placed one arm behind her, not touching her, just making sure she wouldn't fall. As he held the reins, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. It wasn't a burden. It was something else. Something that made his chest heavy but warm at the same time. The sun dipped lower as they rode toward his ranch. The wind grew colder, but Ethan felt a strange warmth spreading inside him. He glanced at Lena from time to time. Every time their eyes met, she looked away shyly. They rode in silence until the ranch came into view, just a small house, a barn, open fields, and the lonely beauty of the land. Ethan wondered how different it would feel now, with two more souls living there. When they reached the porch, he helped Lena down gently. She stepped onto the ground as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to stand there. Ethan opened the door for her, letting the warm light spill out. "Come on inside," he said softly. "You're safe now." Lena stepped in slowly, holding baby Rose close, and looked around the home with wide eyes. She didn't say anything, but Ethan could see what she was thinking. She was unsure how long this safety would last. Ethan knew tonight would be the first comfortable night they had in a long time. He also knew this was only the beginning. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. He couldn't turn his back on them now. Not after seeing the fear in her eyes. Not after hearing her say those painful words, and not after feeling that heavy ache inside him that refused to fade. He didn't buy them. He simply chose them. Ethan lit a small lamp as the evening darkness settled around the ranch. The warm glow filled the quiet house, chasing away the shadows that usually kept him company. Tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't alone. Lena stood near the doorway, holding baby Rose close, unsure if she should move or stay still. Her feet were dusty, her clothes worn, and her eyes carried the tired heaviness of someone who had waited too long for safety. Ethan gently placed his hat on the table and turned toward her. "You can sit," he said softly. "You don't have to stand there." Lena hesitated, then stepped forward slowly. She chose the edge of the nearest chair as if afraid she might be taking someone else's place. Rose squirmed in her arms, giving a small cry. Ethan noticed immediately. "Is she hungry?" he asked. Lena nodded, embarrassed. "She hasn't eaten since morning," she whispered. Ethan felt that ache again, the same one he felt when he first saw them at the old railway stop. Without another word, he moved to the small kitchen area and warmed a bottle of milk he kept for emergencies. He wasn't used to caring for babies, but he understood enough to know she needed help right now. When he handed the bottle to Lena, she held it with trembling hands, feeding Rose with gentle care. The baby sucked eagerly, as if this was the first real comfort she had felt in hours. Watching them, Ethan felt something shift inside him. He had always believed his home was meant to stay empty, that life had already taken enough from him, and he had nothing left to give. But seeing Lena holding Rose, both of them finally warm and fed, softened something he had hidden behind layers of silence. "Thank you," Lena murmured, breaking his thoughts. "You don't have to thank me," Ethan replied. "Anyone would have done the same." But deep down he knew that wasn't true. Most people had passed her by. Most people didn't stop for strangers, especially ones carrying their whole world in their arms. After Rose finished drinking, Lena gently tucked her close and rocked her softly. Ethan watched her with quiet respect. She was so young, yet she carried herself like someone who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "Do you want me to find you a blanket?" Ethan asked. "Yes, if it's not trouble," Lena said, her voice small. "It's no trouble," he replied. He stepped into the spare room, a small space he rarely used. He grabbed 2 blankets, one thick, one light, and returned to the room. Lena took them with careful hands, as if afraid they might disappear if she held them too firmly. "You and the baby can sleep in here," Ethan said, pointing to the spare room. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and warm." Her eyes widened. "You're giving us a room?" "It's the only one I've got," he said with a gentle shrug. "And it's yours for as long as you need." Lena stood there for a moment, overwhelmed. She didn't know how to respond. No one had ever offered her something without asking for something in return. She didn't understand this kind of kindness, but she nodded softly and carried Rose into the room. Ethan stayed outside the door, giving her space. He heard Lena whispering to the baby, her voice low and full of relief. He couldn't hear the words, but the tone told him everything. Lena felt safe for the first time in a long while. After a few minutes, she stepped back out. "I don't want to bother you," she said, keeping her gaze low. "But is there anything I can do? Maybe I can help with chores or cooking or cleaning. I don't want to stay here without doing something." Ethan lifted his hand gently. "You don't need to worry about that right now. You're tired. Rest tonight. We'll see tomorrow." Lena hesitated again. It was clear she wasn't used to hearing that she could rest. When Ethan finally sat down on the couch, the silence filled the air. But it wasn't the old, heavy silence he knew. This one felt different, softer, almost warm. Lena sat across from him, holding Rose close to her chest as the baby slept peacefully. Ethan spoke first. "You haven't told me much about your parents." Lena took a small breath. Her voice was quiet when she replied. "They passed away last year. My father got sick during winter. He was strong, but it came so fast. My mother tried to take care of us, but after he was gone, she lost herself. She passed away months later." Ethan listened without interrupting, letting her speak at her own pace. "We went to live with my father's brother. At first they said they would help, but they had their own children, their own problems. And I was just one more mouth to feed. Then Rose was born and things got worse. They said I brought too much trouble. They said it wasn't their job to take care of us." Lena looked down at the baby's tiny hand resting on her arm. "They said someone else might want us." Ethan's fists tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "That wasn't right." They thought they were being practical, Lena whispered, but they didn't think about what would happen to us. Ethan leaned back, thinking. He had seen hard lives and heard difficult stories before, but something about Lena's voice, the quiet acceptance of something that should never have been asked of a child, made him wish he could rewrite her past. "You're safe here," Ethan repeated quietly. Lena nodded, though her eyes were still unsure, still learning to trust. As night grew deeper, Lena finally stood. "I'll put Rose to sleep now." "All right," Ethan said. "Get some rest, too." She walked to the spare room slowly, looking back for a moment as if checking whether she was truly allowed to sleep peacefully. When she vanished behind the door, Ethan let out a long breath. He stared at the lamp, watching its flame dance softly. This house had been empty for so long. For years he had lived with only the sound of creaking floors and the whispering wind outside. Tonight, he heard something different. Soft footsteps, the faint cry of a baby, and the quiet breathing of two people who had survived too much. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe trouble, maybe questions. Maybe responsibility he wasn't ready for. But he did know one thing. He wasn't going to let them face the world alone. When Ethan finally went to bed, he listened carefully. Every sound from the spare room reminded him that things were changing. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel lonely. The next morning, he woke to a soft noise, the sound of pans clinking and a gentle humming. Ethan walked into the kitchen to find Lena already awake, preparing a simple breakfast. She looked nervous when she saw him. "I didn't want to sleep too long," she said quickly. "I thought I should make myself useful." "You didn't have to," Ethan told her. "But thank you." She smiled faintly, and it was the first real smile he had seen from her. Rose was lying on a folded blanket on the table, playing with her hands. The baby looked healthier already. After breakfast, Lena insisted on helping with chores. She followed Ethan to the barn, watching quietly as he fed the animals. He noticed how quickly she learned, how carefully she listened, how hard she tried to do things right. "You don't have to work so hard," Ethan said. Lena looked down. "I don't want you to feel like we're a burden." Ethan shook his head. "You're not." Those two words froze her. She didn't know how to reply. Nobody had ever said that to her before. As the day went on, Ethan realized how different the ranch felt now. There was movement, life, gentle voices, small footsteps. Rose's tiny laughter filled the barn when Ethan pretended his hat was a toy for her. Lena watched silently, her eyes soft with gratitude. By evening, the ranch no longer felt like a lonely place. It felt whole. Ethan found himself talking more, teaching Lena about the land, the horses, the cattle. She listened with interest, asking questions that made him smile without meaning to. That night, as the sky filled with stars, Lena stood on the porch holding Rose. Ethan joined her quietly, gazing out at the land he'd known all his life. "It's peaceful here," Lena whispered. "It is," Ethan agreed. "Thank you for letting us stay," she said softly. "You're welcome," he replied. "Stay as long as you need." Lena looked at him for a long moment, her eyes shining in the moonlight. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to, because for the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged somewhere, and Ethan, without even realizing it, had started to feel the same. This was only the beginning. But it was a beginning none of them would forget. The next few days passed quietly on the ranch, but the calmness did not erase the worries that slowly grew around Ethan, even if he didn't show them. The world beyond his land had a way of noticing things, and small towns never stayed silent for long. Still, inside the ranch house, life was peaceful. Lena woke early every morning, feeding Rose and helping with small chores. Ethan tried to stop her from working too much, but she insisted. She wanted to feel like she belonged, not like she was merely receiving charity. Ethan watched her from a distance sometimes. She moved carefully, as if afraid of breaking the peace around her. And every time Rose laughed or stretched her tiny hands toward him, Lena's face softened with a mix of relief and happiness. The ranch felt warmer than it had in years. But outside this small, safe world, eyes were starting to turn toward them. It all began when Ethan went to town for supplies, a simple trip that should have meant nothing. He needed milk for Rose, new blankets, and a few items to repair the fence. Normally, he didn't speak much in town and people didn't bother him, but that day, things were different. As he placed a few baby items on the counter, the storekeeper lifted an eyebrow in surprise. "Didn't know you had company out on that ranch," he said casually. Ethan didn't want to explain anything. "Just helping someone," he replied, keeping his voice calm. But the storekeeper wasn't the type to keep things quiet. He leaned forward a bit. "Helping who exactly? Rare for a man living alone to buy baby things." Ethan felt tension rise in his shoulders. "It's not what you think." "I'm not thinking anything," the storekeeper said, though the curious look on his face said otherwise. "Just unusual, that's all." Ethan paid, nodded politely, and walked out. But he knew that conversation would not stay between the two of them. The town had many mouths, and each one was ready to carry stories to every corner. By the time Ethan returned to the ranch, he tried to push the worry aside. When he stepped inside, he found Lena on the floor playing with Rose, who was giggling softly. The baby reached out to him, and Ethan felt his breath ease a little. "You found everything you needed?" Lena asked, standing quickly as if she wasn't supposed to be sitting on the floor. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "Everything's fine." But Lena, being more observant than he expected, noticed the tightness in his expression. "Did something happen?" Ethan shook his head. "Nothing you need to worry about." He didn't want to burden her with town gossip. But trouble has a way of arriving even when uninvited. The next afternoon, as Ethan fixed the fence along the north line of his property, he saw dust rising on the horizon. A rider was coming fast. His horse trotted toward Ethan with purpose, and Ethan felt his stomach tighten. As the figure came closer, he recognized the sheriff's brown jacket and hat. Sheriff Hale slowed his horse near Ethan and nodded respectfully. The sheriff wasn't a bad man. Fair, quiet, and usually kept to himself. But people often called him when they wanted answers to questions Ethan couldn't control. "Afternoon, Ethan," the sheriff greeted. Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans. "Sheriff, something wrong?" Hale looked around the land before speaking. "Mind if we talk for a bit?" Ethan nodded slowly and waited. The sheriff leaned on the saddle horn. "We got a couple reports in town. Folks say you've been buying baby supplies. They're curious, that's all." "That's all?" Ethan asked dryly. Sheriff Hale gave a small sigh. "You know how people are. They don't know your business, so they try to guess. Normally, I'd ignore it. But someone mentioned a young girl staying with you. And a baby. I had to come see, just to make sure everything's all right." Ethan looked away for a moment, staring across the open field. He never liked explaining himself, but he also knew he couldn't be careless. "Her name is Lena. She's been through a lot. I found her abandoned near the old railway stop. I brought her here so she could rest and keep the baby safe." The sheriff nodded slowly. "How old is she?" "Too young to be out there alone," Ethan answered honestly. "But old enough to know suffering no one should know." "And the baby?" "Her sister," Ethan explained. "Rose." Sheriff Hale took a thoughtful breath. "So you're taking care of them?" "Yes," Ethan said simply, "because someone needed to." The sheriff studied his face for a long moment. "I don't doubt your intentions, Ethan. I know you. You're not the kind of man who hurts anyone. But some folks won't see it that way. They'll twist the story because they don't understand kindness without expecting something behind it." Ethan's jaw tightened. I don't care what they think. I won't put her back into danger. I'm not asking you to, Hale said quickly. I'm only warning you. A couple people said her relatives might come asking questions. They heard she's here and think they should have control, maybe to avoid getting a bad reputation. Maybe because they feel guilty now that the town's talking. Ethan's eyes hardened. They left her out there. They don't get to pretend they care. I agree, the sheriff said quietly, but the law doesn't always match what's right. Those words landed heavy. Just then, the ranch door opened, and Lena stepped out with Rose in her arms. She froze when she saw the sheriff. Her face went pale. She held Rose tighter, afraid she was about to be taken away. Ethan stepped forward gently. It's okay, Lena. Come here. She walked slowly. Eyes locked on the sheriff as if expecting the worst. Sheriff Hale softened his tone. Miss, I'm not here to scare you. I'm only checking if you're safe. Lena swallowed nervously. We're safe, she whispered. The sheriff nodded. That's good to hear. But even his gentle tone couldn't stop the trembling in Lena's hands. She had been thrown away by the only family she had left. Now a stranger in a badge stood in front of her, and all she could think was that someone might take her freedom away again. Ethan stepped closer to her, standing like a shield. She's staying here, he said with quiet firmness. The sheriff looked at her one last time, then nodded. I'll let the judge know how things look. But be careful, Ethan. If her relatives come knocking, things might get messy. I'm ready, Ethan said plainly. When the sheriff left, Lena stood still, her breathing uneven. Ethan turned to her. You don't have to be afraid, he told her gently. Tears gathered in her eyes. Will they take us away? No, Ethan said. I won't let that happen. His voice was steady. It wasn't a promise made lightly. That night, Lena barely spoke. She kept checking the windows, listening to every small sound outside. Rose sensed her tension and stayed fussy, crying more than usual. Ethan sat across from her at the table, watching her worry with growing frustration. Not at her, but at the world that caused such fear. You're not going anywhere, he said again. I mean that. Lena finally lifted her eyes. Why are you doing this for us? Ethan looked down at his hands before answering. Because nobody should face the world alone. Because someone should have helped you before. Because I know what loneliness feels like. Lena held Rose tightly and whispered, We don't want to cause trouble. You're not trouble, Ethan said softly. For a long moment, Lena didn't speak. Then slowly, her shoulders relaxed, just a little. Not fully, but enough to show she was trying to believe him. The next morning brought more tension. As Ethan worked near the barn, Lena stepped outside with Rose to feel the sun. She kept glancing toward the road as if expecting someone to appear. A horse passing far in the distance made her jump. Ethan walked to her side. You're safe, he reminded her. I'm trying to be brave, she whispered. I just don't want to be taken back there. You won't be, he repeated. But he also knew that saying it and ensuring it were two different things. Later that day, Ethan heard footsteps behind him. When he turned, he found Lena standing there nervously. If someone comes for me, she said quietly, I'll tell them I don't want to go. I'll tell them you're kind. I'll tell them you saved us. Ethan nodded. Your voice matters, and I'll stand with you. Lena nodded slowly, trusting him a little more. But both of them knew the trouble wasn't over. They just didn't know how close it was. Because somewhere in town, a certain relative had already heard the sheriff's visit. And that person was already planning to come to the ranch, not out of care, but out of fear for their own reputation. Trouble was riding toward them, even if they couldn't see it yet. But Ethan, with a silent promise in his heart, was ready to fight for Lena and Rose, even if he had never fought for anything in years. Ethan woke before sunrise the next morning, but the peace he usually felt at dawn wasn't there. Something heavy sat inside his chest. He didn't want to worry Lena, so he moved quietly through the house, making coffee and checking the windows as if he expected someone to ride up at any moment. Outside, the sky was still dark blue, touched with cold morning air. The ranch looked calm, but Ethan knew trouble often approached quietly, just like storms. When Lena stepped out of her room holding Rose, she could sense something different. She noticed the way Ethan kept glancing outside. She noticed the way he moved, slow, thoughtful, careful. She held Rose a little closer and swallowed nervously. "Is someone coming today?" she asked softly. Ethan paused. He didn't want to scare her. "Maybe," he said honestly. "But don't worry. No one's taking you anywhere." Lena nodded, though her small hands trembled. She sat at the table and rocked Rose gently. The baby giggled, unaware of the tension around her. Ethan couldn't help but smile a little. Rose always brought some warmth into the room, even when the world outside felt cold and uncertain. After breakfast, Ethan walked out to check the animals. Lena stayed close, helping where she could. She watched him working carefully, noticing something she hadn't paid attention to before: how he always tried to protect her from anything that might cause worry. He stood between her and the open road without even realizing it. He kept the barn door slightly closed when he heard distant hoofbeats. He was watching over her in ways she didn't even understand yet. Around mid-morning, the sound they had both been dreading finally reached the ranch. Hooves, multiple horses. Moving with purpose. Ethan froze. Lena stiffened instantly, clutching Rose close to her chest. "Stay behind me," Ethan said firmly. Lena nodded and took a step back, her breath shaking. She could already feel her heart pounding. The horses grew louder, then slowed as they approached the house. Ethan walked forward calmly, but his eyes stayed sharp. The sheriff's warning echoed in his mind. Her relatives might come, and they might not come peacefully. When the riders stopped at the fence line, Ethan recognized one of them immediately, a man in his late 30s with a stiff posture and eyes that didn't soften. Lena's uncle, the one who had left her at the railway stop as if she were nothing more than a burden. Beside him sat his wife, and behind them were two other men from town, men Ethan didn't trust to do anything out of kindness. The uncle dismounted and walked toward the gate, clearing his throat. "Morning," he said, trying to sound firm, maybe even important. Ethan nodded slowly. "Morning." Lena stayed inside the barn doorway, half hidden, watching with wide, scared eyes. Rose whimpered against her shoulder, sensing her fear. Her uncle's eyes flicked toward her, and she immediately looked away, shaking. "We came to get the girl," her uncle said flatly, as if she were a stray animal. Ethan's face didn't move, but something inside him tightened like a rope being pulled too hard. "She's not going with you." The uncle raised his chin. "She's family. That gives us the right to take her. People in town already heard she's here. They're asking questions. We can't have rumors spreading about us." Ethan stepped forward, his expression steady. "You abandoned her?" The uncle blinked, then frowned. "We didn't abandon her. We just didn't have space or food or time. It was temporary." "That isn't what she told me," Ethan replied calmly. His tone wasn't angry. It was quiet, sharp, honest. And that honesty made the uncle uncomfortable. He shifted his weight and glanced at the other men, hoping to gain support. "She's too young to be living with a man like you," the uncle snapped. "People will think wrong things. You know how it looks." Ethan's eyes didn't waver. "It looks like I helped someone you were supposed to protect." The uncle's face reddened. "You think you know everything? She's not your responsibility." "She was no one's responsibility the moment you left her there," Ethan answered. Those words landed hard. The uncle's wife stepped forward now, arms crossed tightly. "We want her back. And the baby. They belong with us." Ethan glanced toward Lena. She shook her head softly, her eyes filling with tears. She mouthed the words, "I don't want to go." Ethan looked back at the uncle. "She doesn't want to leave," the uncle scoffed. "She's a child. She doesn't know what she wants." Ethan took a step closer. "She knows she doesn't want to return to a place that threw her out." The tension grew so thick that even the horses behind the fence grew restless. The two men from town watched silently, unsure which side to support. The uncle's voice hardened. "We can go to the law if we have to. The judge will ask questions. I'd rather settle this here." "You go to the law," Ethan said calmly. "I'll go with you, and Lena will speak for herself." That made the uncle pause. He hadn't expected Ethan to be willing to face a judge. He didn't expect Lena to have a voice at all. After a long silence, the uncle exhaled sharply. "Fine, we'll take it to the judge." He turned to his horse. Lena swallowed hard. Do I have to go with them?" Ethan shook his head. "No, you stay here." Her relief was so strong it made her knees weak. The riders left, dust rising behind them. Ethan watched them disappear down the road, then walked toward Lena. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, though tears slid down her cheeks. I thought they were going to make me go." Ethan shook his head. "Not while I'm standing here." Lena closed her eyes, hugging Rose more tightly. Later that afternoon, Ethan saddled his horse. Lena stood on the porch, shifting nervously. "You don't have to go," she whispered. "Yes," he said gently. "I do. If I don't speak for you, they might twist the story." "I'm scared," she admitted. Ethan stepped closer. "You won't be alone. The sheriff already knows the truth, and the judge isn't the kind of man who ignores suffering." Lena nodded slowly. She trusted Ethan more than anyone. The idea of him speaking for her eased some of her fear. "I'll be back before evening," Ethan promised. She held Rose's hand lightly. "We'll wait." Ethan rode toward town, the wind cool against his face. His mind was focused, steady, clear. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for Lena and Rose, for their right to be safe. At the courthouse, Sheriff Hale was already waiting. He greeted Ethan with a nod. "I told the judge everything I saw," he said. "He's fair. He'll listen." Inside, Lena's uncle tried to paint a different picture. He claimed he had been worried, claimed he had been planning to return for her, claimed he wasn't aware the railway stop was so dangerous. But when the judge asked why Lena had been left with no food, no money, and a thin blanket for a baby, the uncle's excuses crumbled. Then came the moment that changed everything. The judge looked directly at Ethan. "Why did you bring her to your ranch?" Ethan answered honestly. "Because no one else did." The judge nodded slowly. Then Sheriff Hale stepped forward. "I saw the girl when I visited. She was scared of her relatives, but she was safe with Ethan, and she said she didn't want to return. That means something." The judge leaned back, thinking deeply. "This isn't about pride or reputation," he said. "It's about the welfare of a child and a baby." When the decision finally came, it felt like the entire room exhaled. "Lena," the judge said gently, "you may choose where you want to stay, and no one will force you to return somewhere you believe is unsafe." Lena's uncle stiffened, angry but helpless. The judge turned to Ethan. "And you, sir, if you're willing to look after her until she is old enough to live independently, the court will allow it." Ethan nodded once. "I'm willing." It was decided. When Ethan returned to the ranch that evening, Lena ran out to meet him. She didn't speak at first. She simply cried quietly, holding Rose, overwhelmed by relief. "What did they say?" she finally whispered. "You're staying here," Ethan replied softly. "If that's what you want." Lena nodded quickly, tears shining in her eyes. It is. The weeks that followed felt lighter. Ethan built a small room beside his own so Lena and Rose could have their own space. The baby grew stronger day by day. Lena learned more chores around the ranch, and she did them with a smile, not out of fear. The ranch no longer felt empty. One evening, as the sun set in warm golden light, Rose crawled toward Ethan, giggling as she reached for his boots. Lena stood nearby, watching with gentle eyes. "She likes you?" Lena said softly. Ethan lifted Rose and smiled as she reached for his hat. "I like her too." Lena's voice softened. "Thank you. For everything." Ethan looked at her, feeling a quiet warmth inside him. "You don't have to thank me. You're not a burden. You never were." Lena blinked back happy tears. "I feel safe here." "And you always will be," he said. As the sky darkened and stars appeared overhead, the three of them stood together on the porch. A young girl once abandoned, a baby who nearly lost her future, and a lonely cowboy who never realized how much he needed someone to care for until they arrived. They weren't bound by blood, but something stronger: kindness, trust, and the simple, powerful belief that everyone deserves a place where they are wanted.